square and praying like mad for the Pope's light.
Where moments refuse to die.
This is a momentous hour in world history. This is the invasion of Hitler's Europe.
And where victory lives on.
Plenty of girls are being kissed by plenty of boys they don't know, and they do not care.
You can love it, hate it, embrace it, or turn away.
Lennon was shot to death late last night outside his apartment building.
But it is a past we all share.
Come on out here and give me a salute. Big Davy salute.
This is where yesterday has a home, where we wonder what it was like back then.
Go forward, knights, in safety.
And not too long ago.
His spirit must live on.
It's where history has its place and where the past comes alive. The History Channel.
In the 1970s, America's prisons were a microcosm of the racial tensions gripping the country. And nowhere was that more evident than in Attica, a maximum security prison in western New York State. The largely black and Hispanic inmates came mainly from the state's inner cities. The white guards came mainly from the rural countryside surrounding the prison. Overcrowded, outdated, filled with animosity between prisoners and guards, Attica was a disaster waiting to happen. It began as a minor scuffle between two inmates. But when word spread that guards had roughed up the two inmates during the night, Attica exploded in a full-blown riot on Thursday, September 9th.
That morning when we come out, we decided that we ain't going to take it no more.
Burning mattresses and breaking windows, the rampaging prisoners took control of the part of the prison known as Cell Block D, also the catwalks leading to it, and the area known as Times Square in the center of the prison compound. They also took 32 guards and other employees hostage, prisoners of the prisoners.
We can see the framework of the roof of the carpentry shop and garment building. The new section of the roof is starting to burn.
The small fire soon went out, but the rioting continued. New York State troopers normally assigned to traffic duty were dispatched to prepare to retake the prison.
Get onto the supply truck and pick up the shotguns and rifles. On the double, let's go.
Inside the prison, rebellious inmates allowed 9 guards injured in the takeover to leave. One of them, William Quinn, had suffered severe head injury.
Move back. Other captain will clear the area. Let's move back. Yeah, let's get over there.
Outside, preparations to retake the prison continued.
9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. At ease.
Your instructions are that your weapon is not to be taken. You'll be sent into groups of 5-man teams, and you'll operate as a 5-man unit. You're to meet force with force. There have been some of the prison personnel severely injured here this morning, and we certainly don't want to see any of our people hurt.
D&D troop ready to move in now.
But suddenly, the assault was put on hold by State Corrections Commissioner Russell Oswald. He had arrived in Attica to take control of the situation on orders from New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who was in Washington.
A difficult period for everybody in the state, and naturally the correction officers have got concerns, their families have got concerns, they're worried.
Will you back Commissioner Oswald's plan for reform of the prison system?
Yes, I back Commissioner. I appointed him only 6 months ago, just in order to do the job which he is trying to undertake and hopes to undertake, and I'm confident will undertake.
Known as a prison reformer, Commissioner Oswald immediately countermanded the orders of Attica's hardline warden to retake the prison. Instead, Oswald decided to negotiate with the prisoners, who were angry over treatment they saw as inhuman.
We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be beaten or driven as such.
After the first session, Oswald agreed to pull troopers off the prison rooftops and to bring a TV camera to his next meeting with the inmates.
Take it as you walk. Take it as you walk.
With the camera as their witness, prisoners issued a long list of demands.
We want now speedy and safe transportation out of confinement to a non-imperialistic country. You ship troops to Vietnam, to South Domingo, to all these foreign countries to oppress the brothers. You can bring one of these helicopters in here and ship us on out of this country. We demand that the federal government intervene so that we will...
Reading the prisoners' demands, 21-year-old L.D. Barkley of Rochester, New York. Unlike most of the rebellious inmates who had been convicted of violent crimes, Barkley was serving time for a relatively minor offense, forging a money order. It wound up in Attica after violating his parole.
We urgently demand immediate negotiations through...
And the prisoners demanded their own negotiating committee, an unusual group ranging from radical lawyer William Kunstler and Black Panther leader Huey Newton to Tom Wicker of the New York Times.
I do think that they understood that the hostages were their power. In other words, the state wanted those hostages back, the town of Attica wanted them back, and if they so much as damaged the hair of one head there, then they diminished their power to deal with the state. At least I thought so.
Conceding the inmates' power, state officials immediately agreed to a number of their demands.
I've complied with the several things I said I would do as my part. I saw the three individuals you told me to see. I've brought the press and other media in here to listen as we talk. I earlier promised you there would be no reprisals other than what any law enforcement district attorney might take in terms of any crimes that might have been committed. I also asked that the man with the rifle put it down on the outside, and now my question is, I asked earlier, when will you release the hostages? And isn't now the time for us to talk about that?
But the prisoners refused to talk about the hostages. Instead, they demanded that Oswald put his no reprisals promise in writing.
This is to warrant that there will be no administrative reprisals. I will personally see that some outstanding citizens, not employees of the department, will act as ombudsmen to make certain that this promise is kept. And I've signed my name.
But the inmates still refused to talk about releasing the hostages. Instead, they used the television camera inside to show the world outside that the hostages were okay.
All right. Been treated all right?
Yes, I have so far. I've been treated very good.
No complaints, but no problems so far?
So far, been treated very good.
Another veteran guard, Sergeant Edward Cunningham, agreed.
Now, I work with these men. They haven't done nothing to me. I mean, in the excitement, certain things went on around here. Okay, that's understandable. People get excited and things happen. There's nothing. There's no animosity. Nobody's bothered me since. Nobody intends to bother me. They may kid me, but that all goes with the job. I kid them occasionally, too.
That, at least, was a relief to worried relatives gathered outside Attica's walls. As Commissioner Oswald left the prison after his futile negotiating session, state troopers noted some ominous developments inside the besieged compound, developments that suggested the inmates were not confident the siege would end peacefully.
More activity in the central area, apparently for further barricade construction. You can make out the Molotov cocktails sitting on the ramp between the two chairs in this barricade on the catwalk that comes over to C block.
At the end of the first day, stalemate.
Food and drink in a bucket pulled up by the guards atop the 30-foot wall. A long night of anxiety, the rebellious prisoners still in control of major sections of the maximum security prison. 31 guards held hostage. 4 civilian employees haven't been heard from. Perhaps they too have been detained or were frightened and are in hiding. A doctor from a nearby community was asked to tour the prison.
Both the inmates and the hostages are in excellent condition. They have many minor injuries, but nothing serious. Nobody is suffering. What kind of injuries, what kind of wounds do they have? Bumps and bruises, minor cuts. A couple have possible fractures of their arms, but not serious.
How are the hostages being treated?
Extremely well. The inmates seem to be very solicitous, and they're taking good care of them.
The reason there is no water is sanitary facility.
Friday, September 10th, day 2. Governor Rockefeller stays in touch by phone. Commissioner Oswald went back inside the prison armed with more concessions, more fruit and less pork in the prison diet to appease the black Muslim population, reduced censorship of reading materials, more recreation time. In all, Oswald gave in to 28 of the 30 inmate demands, but not amnesty for the riot.
The governor nor no one else has the power to grant amnesty for the commission of a crime, and that's the falls within the purview of the local law enforcement authorities.
Mr. Oswald, now, you and I know that that's a lie.
The mood turned ugly.
You are an artist at prevarication. I bear witness to your evil deeds, Mr. Oswald. Now, I repeat, as I told you yesterday, we're being lenient with you. We're negotiating. We're talking. We shouldn't be. We should be demanding. Why? Because we have 35 lives, not hostages. And I repeat, Mr. Oswald, a moment's hesitation will cause you their life. And I'm going to tell you before you leave here, if you leave.
Another inmate threatened to make Oswald a hostage.
No more games.
We have been asking for over 29 hours for food and water. We haven't got none. We're going to keep Mr. Russell G. Oswald here until we get the food and the water. Y'all get the food and water, and we release them. That's all.
I'll see as soon as I get back there that food is brought into this yard. I'll do my best to get water at the earliest possible moment. If there's water in there, you'll get water. Thank you.
Commissioner Oswald kept his word, but that threat of being taken hostage led him to abandon face-to-face negotiations, so that job now passed to the group of politicians, reporters, and radicals who had been summoned to Attica by the prisoners. They gathered outside the prison Thursday night.
For the rebel prisoners of Attica, the encouraging appearance last night of people they consider friends, a 30-man mediation committee including a congressman, 4 newsmen, and most importantly, lawyer William Kunstler. Strong disagreement on criminal amnesty because the district attorney of Wyoming County has said he will go ahead and prosecute. I think that can be worked out, but we have to sit down and do it.
Commissioner Oswald allowed the 30-man negotiating team to go inside Attica for the first time late Friday, and from the start, the inmates saw them as the key to working out a peaceful settlement.
I appeal, beseech you all to stand with us. Die with us if necessary. We are not advocating violence. We all want to live. If you people cannot make the commitment that we have made here, we are dead.
Saturday, September 11th, day 3. The stalemate continues. State troopers and prison guards, mindful that many of their comrades or hostages inside, are growing restless.
The time is 6 a.m. September 11th. Although the scene seems to be one of general confusion, actually we know what we're doing and there is order prevailing among our troops.
Then came the announcement that would set the course of future events here. Attica guard William Quinn was dead.
The flag at half-staff for the injured guard who had died the night before set the mood this morning. It was clear that the troubles of this troubled prison had grown worse.
The death of the guard injured in the first hour of the uprising meant that for the authorities, granting amnesty was now out of the question. But that did not deter the negotiating committee.
I returned to the prison that it was on Saturday morning, quite optimistic that we were going to get a settlement.
Tom Wicker was one of the 30 outside observers invited to Attica by the inmates. At the time, he was a columnist for the New York Times. That's Wicker on the left of the picture, interviewing a hostage, Sergeant Cunningham, in the prison yard.
We had entered into a situation where we were literally in the power of these prison inmates, murderers, rapists, and thieves, as people think of them, you know. I don't know how the others felt, but I know that I went in there with considerable trepidation.
Among those keeping a vigil outside the prison walls, the families of some of the 38 men held hostage. The only information they got came from two priests who'd been inside, who could report there'd been no fighting on this afternoon, but who hadn't seen the captive guards since Thursday night. And then suddenly, all kinds of signs that the police were getting ready to move. Helicopters loaded with tear gas were ready. Mediators inside reported they feared a massacre if police did move.
Then Corrections Commissioner Russell Oswald came out and read a message that he'd sent to the prisoners.
I urgently request you to release the hostages unarmed, unharmed, and to accept the recommendations of the Committee of Outside Observers, which recommendations were approved by me, and join with me in restoring order to this institution. Only after these steps are taken am I willing to meet with a 5-member committee chosen by you to discuss any grievances you may have.
I felt very strongly that all the state had to do was just sit there and wait these men out. I didn't see that there was any necessity for an ultimatum. I still don't see, all these years later, I don't see that there was any necessity.
Oswald demanded a prisoner response by 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, but by evening there was still no reply. Instead, Black Panther leader Bobby Seale, who was supposed to be part of the negotiating team, finally arrived at the prison. He walked in, walked out, and said he would not be party to any negotiations.
The commissioners and others do not want me to go into prison, and let's not go in there and try to compromise the brothers' position. We are not going to go in there and try to compromise those brothers' position, and this is the analysis of the Black Panther Party that I just gave you.
Sunday, September 12th, day 4. Less hope.
The major unresolved issue this morning is still the question of total amnesty for the more than 1,200 rebel inmates. So far, prison officials have refused to grant it. The inmates demand it before they free the hostages. Inside D Block, which the insurgents control, both prisoners and hostages made their positions clear.
Now, I'm going to lay it on you the way it is. We're tired of being oppressed. We're going to get this if we all have to die, all of us.
Sergeant Edward Cunningham, who had appeared relaxed and optimistic days earlier, now spoke with foreboding.
Now, this is not a joke. This is not some kind of a little tea party we got here. Now, you've read in the papers all these years of the My Lai massacre. That was only 100 some odd men. We're going to end up with 1,500 men here if things don't go right. At least 1,500. Now, 139, right. 139, or maybe more than that. Maybe more than that.
Sergeant Cunningham, now would you give us a message for Governor Nelson Rockefeller?
Sergeant Cunningham begged Governor Rockefeller to come to Attica.
And if he says no, I'm dead.
With hope for a peaceful solution running out, the focus was on the man who wasn't there, Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Both inmates and, it turned out later, Commissioner Oswald thought the governor could help.
It would seem that it might be appropriate for someone as warm and understanding as Governor Rockefeller to walk that last mile and come.
I called in, talked to him on the telephone. We thought that his very coming would have shown an interest in settling the thing, would have impressed the inmates. They called him the man, you know, the man. If the man had come, it would have shown them, we thought, that the state really was interested, the state really did want to make a settlement.
But Rockefeller refused, instead spending the weekend at his Pocantico Hills estate 300 miles from Attica. Without the governor, and with no solution in sight, tensions at the prison could only increase.
There goes another one. He just threw another grenade inside. That's the man with his back toward me on the extreme left who threw that one. Time is 1:55 p.m. We're on the roof of C Block, looking at a detail of 270 marksmen with instructions to clear the catwalks on command.
In the prison yard, the inmates decided to vote on whether to accept the 28 concessions they had won or to hold out for amnesty. A former inmate recalled what happened next.
And one man stood up and said, why not take it? You got 28 out of 30 demands, I think it was. And then the guys thought, saying, get on out of here, you don't know what you're talking about.
And then there was
one voted again, no.
And you agreed to hold out. You voted to hold out.
Well, yes.
Outside the prison wall, as whiffs of pepper gas filled the air, relatives of the hostages waited all day Sunday for some word of a breakthrough. And last night, when none came, one of those keeping the vigil could contain himself no longer.
I'll tell you what I got to say. I'm shaking a little right now, but I'm not irradical, and I'm not afraid. We've stood out here since Thursday, and my son is in there. Michael Smith is one of the hostages. My feelings are this. You can only pacify a kid with a pacifier so long. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, we was led to believe that there was going to be a definite decision. They was going to bring them out. Now, damn it all, do it. Either go in there and get them, one way or another, bring them the hell out of there.
From behind Attica's 30-foot walls, an answer from his son.
I just hope that the commissioner and the other people in the committee that they've gathered together can come up with a solution to solve these people's problems and ours.
But a peaceful solution at Attica was not to be.
Gradually, members of the Civilian Committee of Observers began to file out after negotiations completely broke down. Some of them spoke with newsmen.
The mood of the prisoners, where are they at right now?
The overall mass mood, to the extent one could judge it, is one of extraordinary and remarkable unity. I've never seen anything quite like that. And I said before, a unity even on a racial basis, whites, blacks, and Puerto Rican, really quite incredible.
They are firm in their demands, and that's it.
In other words, they're not going to let the hostages go until they're granted total amnesty.
That was their last position.
And I knew from then on that we weren't going to get a settlement between the sides.
After conferring with Governor Rockefeller one last time, Commissioner Oswald ordered state troopers to get ready to retake the prison by force, something he had tried hard to avoid.
I know Oswald was reluctant to have an armed attack on the inmates. He was a humane man who would have wished to have had a peaceful settlement if he could have had. I think he probably was not a very forceful man and therefore was not able to override, certainly not the governor, and whether or not he was able to override the other state officials who did come up to Attica and surveyed the situation and reported back to Rockefeller, I don't know.
By early morning, it was clear that one way or another, the Attica prisoner uprising would end on this day. And when the inmates' mediator, William Kunstler, was turned away at the prison gate, he took that as a sign that the attack was imminent, that his 2 days of work to end this uprising peacefully had failed.
What did the guard tell you? He said he had just received orders that no one but uniformed personnel would be permitted in.
Why do you think that they're not letting you in, Mr. Kunstler?
I think they're killing people.
Monday, September 13th, day 5. It was a swift and savage attack that turned Attica into a killing field. And when it was over, 29 prisoners and 10 prison guards and workers lay dead, their bodies sprawled on the catwalks and grounds of Cell Block D.
7:05 a.m., September 13th. We're on the roof of A Block, waiting for the assault to begin.
Just before the final assault, prisoners taunted police by parading hostages on the catwalks, homemade knives pressed to their throats, a reminder of what an assault could bring.
The hostages are on the catwalks with knives at their throats.
At exactly 9:45 a.m., it began.
The helicopters taking off, the first sure sign this morning that the assault on Cell Block D had begun.
It was a terrifying time for the hostages.
The whole group kept saying, we're going to kill you, pigs, we're going to kill you, pigs. When it starts, we're going to die first.
could hear the barked commands.
Your hands on top of your head and move to the outside
Simultaneously, a huge force of state police, sheriff's deputies, and National Guardsmen moved through the gates to attack. Outside the walls, we could hear the gunfire. The gas was so heavy inside and outside the walls that people had to move back. It was a one-sided contest. All the guns belonged to the police. Still, they had to fight, we are told, through some elaborately improvised prisoner defenses. Trenches filled with gasoline, barricades, a tunnel system.
The serious fighting did not last long.
Within the hour, the first sign of the assault's success. The first hostages began to come out, and it was quickly learned that 29 of the 38 men held captive by the convicts had survived. Not all could walk out. 4 are critically injured, and 9 are dead.
Killed, said police officials, when their throats were slashed. In the first confused moments, everyone believed the inmates had carried out their threat to slaughter the hostages.
Well, several had their throats slashed. I don't have all the details.
But the coroner's office quickly contradicted that story.
The first 8 autopsies were on the cases identified to us as hostages. All 8 cases died of gunshot wounds. There was no evidence of slashed throats.
The new information came as a shock. It was the first indication that the assault had gone wrong. The police, not the convicts, had killed the hostages.
I mean, somebody knew that those men's throats had not been slashed, and yet the state of New York said that those men's throats had been slashed. And it's as outrageous a lie, it seems to me, as has ever been told by an official body in this country.
You've got to give us time to develop all this information.
Why can't we speak to a state police officer, for example, to find out how this assault was conducted, how the shooting took place?
You'll have through the state police.
I am getting a feeling that somebody's trying to cover up something. How can I escape that conclusion?
Cover up. It was a word that hung in the air much of that terrible afternoon.
We would like to explain to you what apparently has been a misstatement of facts, the origin of which facts, unfortunately, were given to the press.
The line of ambulances made it clear that this assault had its price. At least 28 prisoners were also killed, and the calls for medical help within the prison went on all day. For the wives and parents of the hostages, it was an agonizing 2 hours as the names of survivors were called.
Hello, Steve, Jackson County, Stockholm. We're out.
And the rescued hostages met their relatives. Some people never saw their men. They only got word they were alive and being hospitalized. The response for most of the relatives was to turn and run to cars to take them to that hospital. Some people couldn't seem to run fast enough. All the hospitals around Attica were busy with the casualties. For a lot of survivors, it had been a very near thing.
Guard Fred Miller got out with a fractured skull and his life.
3 days, no sleep. It's pretty rough. I don't know what we're gonna do with them. Do something, they're gonna wreck the whole country.
Stung by reports of the indiscriminate killings of hostages and inmates alike, authorities were quick to show that the throat-slashing threats had been real.
Officials brought him outside the main gate and stood him in front of newsmen. As the cameras rolled, Kozlowski was told to unbutton his collar, revealing a scar that he says required 30 stitches and ran back to his hairline on the right side. He says his executioner was killed by a state police sharpshooter only seconds before he would have been killed himself.
But 2 other guards believed they owed their lives to their captors.
Man standing behind me, he said,
It's a sham, boss. It's a sham. And I knew from his voice he was an inmate that I had talked to at times. And I didn't quite get his meaning, but he had told me a couple of days later that he had been assigned to protect my life from the other inmates in the yard. But I don't know for sure whether it was intentional on his part or he actually did intend to save my life. But at the time it came to execute me, I felt a little sharp prick barely going through the material of my jacket. And then it stopped and he pulled me backwards.
He wasn't alone. Another wounded guard, a 13-year veteran, also credited an inmate with saving his life.
But I was very, very fortunate, and I had a Puerto Rican boy who knew me, and he didn't do his job, what he was supposed to do. I won't mention his name. I don't want to cause him any...
Well, what was he supposed to do, kill you?
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts now that it's over for you?
I'm going back again. There's work to be done. And if I don't go back, who's going to do it? You know, I have a better understanding of their problem because I lived with them for 4 days. And I feel that I should go back and try to help them.
Inside the prison, the yard of Cell Block D was reduced to rubble by the assault. The firestorm lasted only 6 minutes, but it was 6 hours before Attica was secured.
By mid-afternoon, most of the fighting was over, but there were isolated pockets of resistance in tunnels the convicts had dug. They're not quite sure what's going on inside the walls right now. Those tentative promises of no reprisals probably don't count now.
In retaking the prison, some corrections officers took out their rage on the inmates.
I saw people being prodded, pushed, shoved, kicked with billy clubs, with feet. I saw poundings taking place. Apparently to the more militant blacks. I just sensed a brutality that was just based on strictly racism. I mean, it wasn't a prison riot, it was a race war.
Hundreds of miles away from Attica, a jubilant Nelson Rockefeller expressed his gratification at the outcome.
And I'll never forget the moment when the report was given that 14 guards had come out alive, and while I was on the phone with Bobby Douglas, he said, now it's 15, now it's 16, now it's 17, he said, now 18, and we went up to 21, and I want to tell you, I just was absolutely overwhelmed.
But not too overwhelmed to release a statement, fixing blame where he thought it belonged.
Governor Nelson Rockefeller is charged that rebellious inmates forced the confrontation today in which 9 hostages and 28 prisoners were killed. The governor said the prisoners had rejected all efforts at a peaceful settlement. Rockefeller blamed the 4-day uprising at the prison on what he called highly organized revolutionary tactics of militants.
Not everyone agreed, especially the inmates' negotiating committee.
Any event of that kind can only be termed a tragedy. Any event of that kind, one is certain, you just feel that somehow all of us who were involved should have avoided it. Some way we should have found some way not to have 37 people dead.
Frankly, I'm at loss to see how a governor would not respond to about 8 to 10 legislators on state and federal level to come here and save the lives of people just by talking, possibly, because we needed time. And frankly, I just can't understand it.
Our position as members of the Observer Committee had been that we wanted to meet with the governor. And that was our position down through the time that the commissioner and the police took action.
You think there might have been something been able to work out with no or lesser loss of lives?
As far as I'm concerned, there's always time to die.
Well, I think it was murder, both murder of any inmates that were killed and murder of the guards inside. I could not see why the state could not have waited maybe 4 more days, 8 more days. What difference did it make? And I thought that to yield to outside pressures, to go in and with the sure knowledge guards would be killed and prisoners would be killed, was an act of such monstrosity that I find it hard to put into words.
Rockefeller was unrepentant.
The inmates had been asking for this from the beginning. They wanted me in the yard in a direct confrontation with the 1,200 people. I'm responsible for the administration of the state and the final executive decisions. I felt that we had in Mr. Oswald a very competent person to handle this as his responsibility, and that he should.
What alternatives do you think a man like Oswald had, given the particular demands for...
In all fairness to Oswald, I think he did it as much as he could. He was a man, obviously, ripped and torn, tortured by torment.
Torment in knowing that 11 of his men did not make it out, including Sergeant Cunningham, the seasoned prison guard, who had shared his feelings with reporters twice during his captivity at Attica.
This is not some kind of a little tea party we got here.
Edward Cunningham died in the explosion of gunfire that swept over the prison crosswalk called Times Square.
What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed.
And L.D. Barkley, the petty thief doing time for forging a $124 money order, he died too, shot once in the back in the first minute of the attack. Michael Smith was one of the lucky ones. He got out alive.
The grief winds out now on a daily basis. 2 funerals yesterday, 2 today, 6 tomorrow. This was a Roman Catholic high mass for the prison guard Carl Valone at Batavia. He leaves a wife and 4 children, 3 of which attended the services.
Grieving was slower in coming for the families of the prisoners left dead in the assault.
Today, 4 days after the assault at Attica, the first of the bodies of the prisoners who died there were released by the state. One of the first to be claimed was that of Milton Duval Gray, who was doing 1 to 15 years for narcotics possession and was due for parole in November. He was married with 2 children.
They were killed by the state troopers. They were anxious to shoot, and naturally the Attica is 85% black, so what would they care? And you have your governor, who could care less. Your president, he doesn't care. He's thinking about law and order. This is how he goes, law and order. But you can't do this to people.
In this photo, the slain convict is shown on the left, his brother Wilfred on the right. Today, Wilfred went to claim his brother's body, and as our interview concluded, he returned with tragic word for the family. He was bewildered and bitter.
Well, you know all were murdered. But I'm saying he was laying down, Connie, in a prone position, laying down, and they shot him from behind with a deer slug. 3 of them. That's what they're doing to him up there. That's what the whitey does for you.
"29 inmates and 10 hostages were killed in just 6 minutes of gunfire at Attica the morning of September 13th. One of the victims was Attica prison guard Carl Valone, gunned down as he stood blindfolded outside cell block D. A relative later said that blame rested squarely with the governor, that Valone had been killed by a bullet that had the name Rockefeller all over it.
I'm not willing to say that any of those bullets had anybody's name on it. They had all of our names on it.
In the aftermath of the riot, Governor Rockefeller appointed a commission to find out what went wrong at Attica. The chairman, Robert McKay, dean of New York University Law School. After months of hearings, the report.
Although the commission recognizes that many inmate grievances were justified, the commission condemns the taking of hostages as a means of obtaining redress.
The report underlined the need for real prison reform and warned that without meaningful change to eliminate what they called the dehumanizing aspects of inmate life, we can expect to see more prison riots in the future. But the report did not stop there.
The Commission's report, 515 pages long, is not likely to be popular among prison guards, police, or New York state authorities. The Commission in this report sharply criticizes authorities at all levels for what happened at the prison before, during, and after the riot.
Investigators said that except for the Indian massacres in the late 19th century, the assault on Attica was the bloodiest one-day encounter between Americans since the Civil War.
First, the Commission charges unnecessary shooting.
that there was indiscriminate firing into congested areas by state troopers who did not value the inmates' lives, and that prison guards joined in the shooting without authorization.
I think the reason they couldn't just wait them out was because they couldn't stand to have the order disrupted as it was. The order had to be restored, the institution had to be reopened, and if people had to die, too bad. And that is bureaucracy gone crazy.
Second, that the wrong weapons and ammunition were used, mostly shotguns and 00 buckshot, which in the crowded prison yard led to the killing and wounding of unresisting hostages and inmates. Third, there was, in the Commission's words, an inexcusable failure to provide adequate medical care for wounded prisoners.
And 81 men, as I recall it, were wounded that morning. The state of New York had made no effort whatever to provide medical care for what they must have done was going to happen. They must have done was going to happen. And if they didn't know it, we told them the day before, we said there's going to be a massacre in here. I think it's all unforgivable. And the more time that passes, the more I think about it, the more unforgivable it seems to me.
The McKay Commission didn't forgive Nelson Rockefeller either, singling out the state's chief executive for failing to go to Attica despite the stalemate.
The Commission believes, nonetheless, that the governor should have gone to Attica after Commissioner Oswald requested his presence. Not because it was an inmate demand, but because his responsibility as the state's chief executive made it appropriate that he be present at the scene of a critical decision involving great risk of loss of life.
Rockefeller disagreed.
If the governor has to be the one who negotiates, and if the governor does, and this can be true all over the country, we then may find ourselves in a position where the next time they say, well, we won't negotiate with anyone but the president.
He felt that if he came up there, somehow his authority and the state's authority and the orderliness of the state's functioning would be impaired. I don't mean to make that sound like an excuse for Governor Rockefeller, because I think it's a damn poor excuse.
And for the families of dead victims, both prisoner and inmate, the slaughter inside Attica seemed a high price to pay for a governor's principles.
If he had appeared, I believe that none of them would have got hurt. Nobody. But you know how Nelson Rockefeller is. He's an individual. He wants to be individual. As long as he can go out and get votes and give you a lot of promises, and you vote for him, but when he needed to be somewhere to stop something, he never appeared.
And I think that had he come, we might have averted that massacre. I can't be sure of that. It was a risk I thought was worth taking. All these years later, I think even more strongly it was a risk worth taking. I think almost any risk is worth taking in order to save what turned out to be 39 lives.
Criminal charges ranging from murder to sodomy were eventually brought against 62 Attica inmates. But only 6 cases ever went to trial, and of those 6, only 1 resulted in a conviction. Prisoner John Hill was sentenced to 20 years to life for his part in the death of guard William Quinn. 4 years later, another New York State Governor, Hugh Carey, pardoned Hill, and in one sweeping move, he canceled all the indictments against the Attica inmates charged in the riot, mainly because in the confusion of the assault, no one could be sure who did what to whom. There are those who believe that the Attica riot had a profound personal impact on Governor Nelson Rockefeller. He was shocked by what happened, shocked by the takeover. A takeover that to him threatened the very orderliness of government and the institutions in which he so strongly believed. In his last 2 years as governor, he became much more conservative, much more a proponent of law and order. Ironically, no one, neither prisoner, nor police officer, nor state official, was ever held finally accountable for the killing. 43 lives that were lost in the worst prison riot in American history. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century.